The Cornetto Trilogy consists of 3 films, Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, and At World's End, all of which are directed by Edgar Wright and star Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. The time has finally come, guys. Baby Driver comes into theaters very soon. I cannot wait to see that movie. It is without a doubt one of my most anticipated films of the year. But in order to talk about that film, I wanted to talk about the trilogy that made Edgar Wright who he is today. There's so many directors working today, especially in the comedy genre, that are just so plain. You really don't get to feel their style just seeping throughout the films. You don't really get to see their thumbprint throughout the entire movie. Edgar Wright is not one of those directors. When you watch each of these films, it has Edgar Wright written all over it. The way he composes shots even are always trying to infuse a joke. He always is trying to incorporate jokes in wherever he can. And he's also not only able to convey humor just in the way that he composes his shots, but he's also able to do this through his editing, and he's also able to incorporate exposition into his editing. And I appreciate this. It's very refreshing to see a filmmaker that doesn't just beat you over the head with exposition. And obviously Simon Pegg and Nick Frost are so incredible in these films. Their chemistry and their comedic timing are on another level in this trilogy. And I love how in each film both of them are playing different characters. They never play the same character more than once. Especially in the third film, At the World's End, where Simon Pegg is not the straight man like he was in Hot Fuzz. Instead, now Nick Frost is the straight man. As far as comedy goes, I prefer Hot Fuzz the most as opposed to the other films. This movie just makes me laugh so hard. Not that the other 2 movies don't. It's actually really like measuring hairs for me, but when I watch Hot Fuzz, I am just laughing the entire time, and a lot of that is due to Nick Frost. He is so funny in that movie. Every time I watch this film, the part that makes me just die is when Nick Frost just like runs away holding his cowboy hat. It just has me in stitches. But as a complete package, without a doubt, I think Shaun of the Dead is the best movie in this trilogy. And it's also my favorite film that Edgar Wright has directed thus far. It's, in my opinion, not only one of the best horror comedies of all time, but also one of the best just flat-out zombie movies of all time. The editing that I was talking about earlier is so excellent in this film, not only from the scenes at the beginning with the gas station, but also in the Don't Stop Me Now sequence at the pub. The reason I like this film over the other 2 is I feel like in the other films, Simon Pegg would be a little bit better than Nick Frost, or Edgar Wright would be a little bit better than either of them. I never felt like everyone is on the same level, except when I'm watching Shaun of the Dead. I feel like both of these actors are on the top of their game in this film, along with Edgar Wright. And it's not like when I'm watching the other films, I don't feel like they're doing their best. It's just that when you watch Hot Fuzz, Simon Pegg's character is the straight man, which is the opposite at the World's End. But both of these characters in this film are not the straight man. They're both a bunch of goofballs, and I just love all of these characters in this film. And I feel like Edgar Wright is just pulling out every trick in the book. But to talk about Edgar Wright, and more importantly the Cornetto Trilogy, I brought on a special friend, a guest who is known from Screen Junkies and Dan's Lab, somebody that I know you guys are big fans of, Mr. Dan Murrell. How are you doing today, Dan?
I'm great. Happy to talk about the Cornetto Trilogy.
Absolutely. Are you excited for Baby Driver yourself?
I'm very excited for Baby Driver. I think I might have a chance to see it a little bit before it comes out, so I can't wait to see it. Anything Edgar Wright does, I'm excited to see. Good or bad, I think he's one of the most interesting filmmakers that we have working right now, and luckily, I think everything he's done has been good, but this looks like a really kind of fun experiment from him, so I'm very anxious and curious to check it out.
What's your history with the Cornetto Trilogy? Like, how did you get introduced to Edgar Wright, and what was your first experience with these films? Like, what movie did you watch first?
I saw Shaun of the Dead when it came out in the U.S. It came out in, I think, overseas in the U.K. in the summer of 2004, I believe. Then that fall, it was released in the U.S., and I saw it by myself. That was my senior year in college. And then I think a couple days later, I took a friend so they could see it. And then I think a couple days later, I took another friend. I think I saw it maybe 3 or 4 times in the theater. Bought it on DVD when it came out. When I graduated college, I gave the DVD to my roommates as a gift. And that for months was when we would go out, we'd come back at night, and we'd put in Shaun of the Dead. And I mean, we must have watched that movie 34, I don't know how many times, but I just fell in love with it. It's my kind of humor. I love the fact that he mixed horror and comedy. It has genuine heart. It's got a genuine feel to it. It's not just a parody movie. It's a great movie in so many ways. It's up there with Jaws as what I quote as my favorite movie. So it literally is that case of like just taking a flyer on this thing that you'd heard good stuff about and just bringing all of your friends so you have to watch this, you have to watch this. So I love Shaun of the Dead, and even now, and I've seen it probably, I don't know how many times, I still pick up new things. It's such a dense movie.
Yeah, I was the same way. I think I was introduced to it by a friend, and I watched it, and I totally loved it, but I didn't even know that it was part of this trilogy until I had bought the Blu-ray that had Hot Fuzz and The World's End on it, because I had heard of Hot Fuzz. I hadn't heard of The World's End until actually I watched it, but I was totally engrossed in all these films. I thought they were so funny and so clever.
Well, and they're also different. That's what I love about the Cornetto Trilogy is he's not rehashing himself. Shaun of the Dead is a horror comedy. Hot Fuzz is a comedy action movie, very much in the vein of Lethal Weapon, but still with that kind of absurd sense of humor that kind of is a through line to all of these. And The World's End is, I think, as much of a drama as it is a comedy. It actually took me a while to wrap my head around that a little bit because it's a very different movie, even than the other two, even though they're all kind of unique in their own right. I'm lucky living in LA. I moved into LA in 2005. I became a bit of an Edgar Wright groupie, so I was lucky enough to go to different, like I went to a sneak preview of Hot Fuzz that Edgar Wright did a Q&A with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and Timothy Dalton showed up, and my James Bond brain blew up. That was James Bond, in addition to how great he was in the movie. And then when The World's End came out, there was at the Cinerama Dome here in Hollywood, there was a triple feature. It was Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and then a premiere of The World's End with Edgar Wright introducing in a Q&A, and it was so much fun to be able to kind of take this journey with Edgar Wright as a fan, from having never heard of him to going through the movies, his TV show Spaced, which I think is really great and is kind of the very early signs of what he would go on to be as a filmmaker, and then as he's progressed through Scott Pilgrim and now through Baby Driver and everything else that he's done, it's been fun to kind of like, this is one of the first directors I've been able to journey with from project to project in real time. So I love everything that he's done.
I do believe that you have a pretty interesting story about Edgar Wright. Do you care to talk about that at all?
He did. When Hot Fuzz did a premiere, it was at a theater here in LA, and it was a triple feature. So it was Point Break, and then Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz was first, then Point Break, and then the third one was the John Woo movie, The Killer. And scratch that. It was Hard Boiled. The third one was Hard Boiled, which it was kind of like Edgar Wright's like, we're going to premiere Hot Fuzz, and then I'm going to show you two of the movies that had a massive influence on it. And I'd been out with my friend the night before at Grindhouse, the movie Grindhouse, which is a 3-hour movie at a midnight show. So we were exhausted, and we sat through the first two. Edgar Wright introduced Hard Boiled. It was the last movie of the night. And we decided, we wanted to stay, but we were so exhausted. So we decided that we were going to sneak out and head home. And as we were walking out of the lobby, Edgar Wright was there talking to the theater manager, I don't know who, and he saw us walking out. He's like, "You're leaving?" We're like, "Yeah." First of all, we were just like, eyes bulging out of our heads. We were like, "Yeah, we're so sorry. This has been so much fun, but we were out late last night. We're so tired." And he's like, "Well, you've seen The Killer, right?" And we're like, "No, actually, we haven't seen The Killer." And he goes, "Okay." And he takes me in one hand and my friend in the other hand, puts his hands on the back of our necks, not in a threatening way, in a very brotherly way, turns us around and says, "Okay, we're going back inside." Marches us back into the movie theater, walks us down the aisle. As he's walking down the aisle, he says, "I'll make a deal with you. I'll sit and watch the first 15 minutes of this movie with you if you promise to stay for the rest." And we were like, okay. So he sat us down. He sat next to me and my friend for 15 minutes through the whole first gunfight, first action scene. It's over. He gets up. He turns to us. He goes, "Now stay." We said, "Okay," and walks out. And again, like, just you can tell even just such a love he has for cinema, that he will take two strangers who he could have just let us go, but he wanted us to experience that. And I think that says a lot about who he is as a filmmaker and the love that he has for movies, is that he just wants to share this passion that he has for filmmaking. And I mean, this was a while ago. I don't know if he would just be standing on his own in the lobby anymore in a theater, but it's a story that I'll never forget, and who knows, maybe I'll have the chance to tell him about it someday, because this has been over 10 years plus now. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it's one of those memories that is always going to be very special to me.
That's awesome, but I totally think that when you watch an Edgar Wright movie, you can really tell that he is a movie fan first and a director second. I think you can really see that he's paying homage to these films that are clearly very inspiring to him, and you can see that while his movies are so original, you can definitely see little breadcrumbs of other very classic films.
He is, and what I think is one of the great things about him is, and this isn't a negative thing, but him versus, for example, Tarantino, I think they have a similar style in that they're very much inspired by movies that came before them. But I think the way that they're different, composers, if you're going to put it in a musical analogy, is, Tarantino will take movies that he likes, and he'll take the pieces, especially in his early movies, Reservoir Dogs particularly, he'll take pieces of other things that he likes, and he'll jam them together in such an interesting way that it makes something completely new. And I think Edgar Wright kind of does the same thing, in that he will take inspiration, and you'll see Point Break or Lethal Weapon, and you'll see these things, but he will riff on that and turn it into something completely new and something completely different that has its origins in the things that he loves. And I love how he kind of does that. He kind of remixes movies at the same time bringing his own, and Simon Pegg, when Simon Pegg co-writes with him, his own take on them and his own perspective, and just that's what I love about him. It's that idea of, like, he's not just doing nostalgia, he's taking familiar things and putting it into his voice and spinning it in a different direction.
Yeah, something that was very refreshing when watching this film is that it's an actual movie with production and lines, and it's well lit, it's well directed, it's well edited, and that's something that I really appreciate about these films, because I feel like any insert Will Ferrell movie like Anchorman or Step Brothers or anything since then, a lot of films are just trying to recapture that vibe that those movies got, and they just point cameras at really funny people and hope that they say funny things, and that's just really something that I miss, is this actual sense of a movie when I go see comedies, especially nowadays.
Well, that's my issue with a lot of particularly comedies, particularly American comedies nowadays, is so many of them have kind of fallen into this trap of, we're going to light the set very flat and very bright, and we're going to put two cameras on the actors, and we're just going to let those cameras roll and let them riff and cut down the best of their improv into a scene, and then we'll have kind of a loose structure that connects those two. And I feel like that was refreshing and invigorating in the kind of Judd Apatow movement with 40-Year-Old Virgin, and we hadn't seen comedy necessarily done like that before, but I feel like it's now become a crutch for a lot of filmmakers. And what Edgar Wright does is I don't think there's a lot of improv in his movies. I think that a lot of it is written in the script, and he's saying, okay, I'm going to use comedy here, but I remember in Shaun of the Dead, everything with Sean's mother, with Barbara, I remember watching that and going, wow, this movie is really going to some dark places and some very deep places, and places I didn't think that it would go, or that a comedy, quote unquote, would go. And I love that he approaches his films like that. Is, I'm not just making a comedy, I'm making a movie that has jokes in it, but also has drama in it. And I think that's so refreshing, I guess. I find so much of his work refreshing, and that he's bringing this fresh, energetic tone, but he's not boxed in, and he does so many different things.
And that's also one of the reasons that I wasn't really super looking forward to Ant-Man that he was directing, but only because I like him and I like superheroes. That was the reason that I was kind of looking forward to that movie, but I would really rather him do something that is an Edgar Wright feature, like all these films, because again, they are so different, and I don't want to put him in this little box of these big, multi-million-dollar studio films, these tentpole movies. I'd rather see him do something fun and something that he wants to do.
Well, I was actually very interested in Ant-Man, and I remember back when, I think this is 2005 or 6, Spaced was coming out on DVD. I'm going to date myself. It was coming out on DVD, and they had an event, and Edgar Wright was signing autographs, and I remember someone had brought him an Ant-Man comic, and he wrote, "Watch this space." And this is before Iron Man came out. This is before the MCU was a thing, and Edgar Wright had been developing Ant-Man for a while. That was his passion project. That was his dream project, was he wanted to do Ant-Man. And I think subsequent to that, it kind of, as you said, it got put in a box a little bit of, well, it's not this kind of oddball superhero movie. It's now in the constraints of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so it has to have X, Y, and Z, these characters, and I liked Ant-Man. I'm a fan of that movie, but I do kind of wish I could live in that alternate reality where he could have made the Ant-Man movie outside of the constraints of the MCU, because I think he would have done something really interesting and unique. And this is kind of one of the things that's drawing me to Baby Driver, is I think that he is putting a lot of that energy and into, that kind of genre energy of, I'm going to bring myself to this genre, into the chase action genre. But I do, there's this little thing in the back of my head that's always like, what would Edgar Wright's Ant-Man have been like? Because he had been working on it for so long and seemed very passionate about that.
And something that I feel like is a little bit underappreciated with these films is the fact that Simon Pegg and Nick Frost are both so excellent in these movies, especially Nick Frost, because I feel like a lot of times in movies nowadays, they take these people who are like bigger, like physically, and whether it's like an actor or an actress, I feel like they just play them down into just being only able to fall down or to be stupid, whereas in these movies, Nick Frost is very capable, and in each film, he's a different person.
Well, that's what I like about what they did with that, is I agree, they could easily have fallen into these cookie-cutter things of Nick Frost is the stupid one and Simon Pegg is the smart one, and I think that even Simon Pegg, if you look in Shaun of the Dead, he is, Nick Frost is kind of the goofball, but Shaun is very immature, and he has a lot of growing to do, and he has a lot of, maturation that goes on. And yes, he does take care of Ed, but Shaun himself is a very flawed person. If you look at Hot Fuzz, Nicholas Angel is the epitome of put together. He has his life together. He needs to do the opposite. He needs to kind of loosen up, and I think that instead of being kind of his foil in that movie, in Hot Fuzz, Nick Frost kind of plays his mirror, the funhouse image of him, and that, together they make the perfect police officer. And it's about them both kind of coming to each other's worldviews and meeting in the middle, and that's the journey of that film. And then in The World's End, they kind of switch roles, where now Simon Pegg is the ne'er-do-well, Nick Frost is the guy that has everything together, and they play with that dynamic, which I love so much. It would have been so easy for Edgar Wright just to say, like, okay, Nick Frost is the screw-up, Simon Pegg is the straight-laced guy who's always yelling at him, and we're just going to do this third movie. And I like that they kind of turn that dynamic on its head, so that now it's Simon who needs to be reined in, and there's so much about The World's End that even on third, fourth, fifth viewings, it took me time to kind of wrap my head around, because it does defy your expectation a little bit about what you think an Edgar Wright movie and a Cornetto movie is going to be, because it is very heavy, and it takes on very heavy themes about peaking, the kind of tragedy of peaking early in life, and the regret, and yet it still does it in such an engaging way that it really took me aback when I first saw it. I was like, wow, that was not what I expected. But I actually, in a lot of ways, come to appreciate that movie in some ways the most out of the three of them, because so many of the things that were in the first two are kind of turned on their head in that movie.
Do you want to see Edgar Wright step out of his comedy zone a little bit? Because even though, like, Shaun of the Dead is like a horror comedy and Hot Fuzz is an action comedy, they're obviously very comedy-oriented. Would you like to see him do, like, a straight-up horror movie?
I mean, I think that would be really interesting. I think mainly it's I just want to see him do something that he's passionate about. But one of the things that I'm hoping with the success of Get Out earlier this year is that studios are going to allow niche directors, or despite the fact that he's made a lot of movies, Edgar Wright's not, I think, what most people would consider a blockbuster director, but will allow them to make these kind of offbeat passion projects that can connect with the wider audience, because I would love to see him. I love his take on things. And if you've seen Don't, as part of the Grindhouse trailer series, he did one of kind of a schlock horror movie called Don't, which was just hilarious because he was in that convention of those horror genres, but it was also hysterically funny. And I'd love to see him follow that path. I think he's got such a wide passion for cinema. I will follow him down whatever road he goes down. I just think that it should be the road that he chooses. And if that means that he makes $20 to $30, $40 million budgeted movies, that's totally fine. Not every director, I think, should be making $300 million blockbusters.
I completely 100% agree. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on my show and gracing us with your presence and your knowledge and your very clear passion about this director and somebody that you have a very clear affinity for. Thank you so much for being on my channel and being able to talk about these films that have very clearly had a big impact on you.
My pleasure. Fingers crossed for Baby Driver. Let's see how it is, and thanks for having me on.
Well, that's going to do it for today, guys. Thank you again for checking out my video. Please go subscribe to Screen Junkies Plus and go watch Dan's Lab. Dan is such a movie buff. He has a very clear passion for film, and he has an absolutely massive knowledge of movies, and it's very clear to see how big of a deal that movies are to him. So what are your favorite Edgar Wright movies? Where do you rank his films? Leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you liked today's video, and if you did, click on the link down below and subscribe to my channel for more movie reviews and related things. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.